If you want to make things that make things better, have fun doing it, and learn to help yourself and everyone around you flourish, well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Enliven. This is the show where we explore what's possible and the people, the principles, and the practices that are going to help you build enlivening products and enlivening organizations. I'm your host, Andrew Scottsko, and in this episode, my guest is Mosher, the CEO of Vestigo, a company that uses outdoor adventure experiences to help people push outside their comfort zones, get comfortable being uncomfortable, and build deep trust with their teammates. Marshall caught the entrepreneurial bug at the tail end of his master's program and has not looked back since. After graduating from the University of Georgia, Marshall spent time at the Singularity University Global Solutions Program, the fellowship at NASA Ames, and ever since he's been on the path of empowering human experience through technology. This is such a fun conversation that I cannot wait for you to listen in. We cover so much ground. We talk about how to make hard product pivots and face down the tough emotions involved with walking away from a major product investment. We talk about self-identity. We spend time talking about how to cultivate trusting teams and create experiences where people deeply connect with each other, and how you can bring that to people in your life and your workplace. Always, always, always focused on learning and pushing outside his comfort zone. Marshall also just shares with us something really fun, what it actually feels like to fly around in an Iron Man jetpack suit. Yes, I am serious. This is such a fun conversation that I need to stop talking about it and let you just get to it. So without any further delay, please enjoy Marshall Mosher. Marshall, officially, welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Thanks. Doing great. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure. So, I've got to start off by asking you something that I don't think very many people on the planet can answer, but I think you can. What does it feel like to be Iron Man?
So I think Richard would probably have a better answer to that. The jet suit is probably what you're referring to with gravity. It's pretty amazing. It's for anyone who hasn't seen it, just search Take On Gravity, the hashtag, or gravity.co on Instagram, and you'll see what looks like the real life Iron Man suit flying around. It's pretty incredible, and it works purely based on vectoring force, moving those force vectors in and out to go up and down and turn left and right. So you actually pull the throttle in the whole way and hold it there, unlike what most people think. But it's pretty incredible. Although I will say it takes a little bit of getting used to, a little bit of athleticism. But once you kind of master that, it's pretty incredible.
So you gotta hold on. We gotta go to the backstory here for a second. I'm so curious. How did you get? How did that happen? How did you get involved in that? Where you were suddenly flying this crazy jet suit around? And for that matter, paint the picture. Where was this? How did this happen? When did this? Give me the story here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so my involvement with Gravity is on the U.S. team. So Gravity's based out of the U.K., right outside London in Salisbury. Richard Browning, the founder, is the one who invented the suit. Crazy story that could take up an entire podcast to tell that story. Pretty amazing. Richard's had a ton of incredible keynotes and talks you could look up online to hear the full story. But my involvement is mainly with helping to facilitate the US-based training experiences. So actually being able to get in the suit and learn how to fly it yourself from an experiential standpoint. So all of the pilots, the real pilots are in the UK. So while I've, gotten in the suit and know how to fly it, the people that are racing around are all the UK pilots. You'll probably notice that they're all pretty small, a little bit smaller than what an American proof suit would need to be. We're all a little bit heavier here in the US.
They're like there's like the whole horse jockey thing, right? It's like
right, yeah, no, size. Exactly, because around 200 pounds is around the max. I say around is because there's a lot of factors that go into how much thrust and lift it has. Altitude is one, temperature is another, but we don't like to run the engines on 100%. So usually pilots tend to be around 150 or even less than that. So pretty small guys, but we actually are prototyping a bigger suit that can handle a lot more. So any heavier pilots like us, aspiring US people, have hope now. But yeah, the story is pretty interesting. So I have always been passionate about using technology and entrepreneurship to promote access to adventure sports from the standpoint of leading a healthier and happier lifestyle. So anything that has kind of an intersection of technology, adventure, and entrepreneurship is definitely something I get excited by. And my company, Vestigo, uses all kinds of outdoor adventure experiences for innovation training for other companies, where we'll create experiences that are very first step experiences. So anyone can participate in them, but they'll be mentally challenging. And that mental aspect of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone is one of the key aspects for innovation development, kind of building up that mindset. So because I had that background in using these adventure sport experiences for innovation training, when I got connected to the leader of the U.S. team and started building a relationship with him, that was right around the time when Gravity was exploring doing these kind of experiential jet suit training events. And our background at Vestigo of combining action adventure sports with leadership development, especially on the high executive level, just worked really well to kind of form a bit of a collaboration and partnership together to start testing those. But the story of how we originally got synced up is pretty interesting. We were just talking about this before the interview about Burning Man. So 2 years ago, my first experience at Burning Man, I had no idea what to expect. But from all the pictures, there's a couple things that are very evident and obvious. One of those is that people like creating unique ways to get around.
Yes.
Whether it's an art car or a mutant vehicle, whatever you want to call it, essentially taking a bus and turning it into a pirate ship where, a bunch of people can ride on it, or whether it's an individual vehicle. A lot of people ride bikes, but they'll, spruce up their bikes to make them look like a zebra. Just all kinds of crazy stuff that there's nothing that hasn't been seen at Burning Man, I'm sure. But one thing that I was really interested in at the time was the emergence of these electric vehicles. And this was back in 2016, I think. So like the hoverboards were just becoming popular. The one wheels like just come out, the electric unicycles, all those things. So, and the boosted boards. So I wanted to make a surfboard that looked like it was flying across the desert by taking a boosted board, putting it under this old surfboard and putting old mountain bike tires, cutting them up and making off-road tires for the boosted board.
Nice.
And the surfboard was so low to the ground that the fins just cut or cleared the ground. So it was high enough to work, but low enough that you couldn't see the boosted board. So the wheels would kick up the playa dust on the bottom of the board and then radiate out from there. So it looked like I was surfing this wake of dust.
That is amazing.
It looked like it was flying. You couldn't tell that I had a boosted board under it as my kind of personal transportation device. And one of my playa gifts was I would teach people how to surf. Of course, the surf in the playa, it's a little bit different from real surfing, but I thought that would be a cool thing to do. So I was just cruising around one day and I saw this really nice camera that this guy was taking pictures of different people, and I just happened to ride by him. He snapped a photo of me, and whenever someone has a really nice camera at Burning Man, that there must be some kind of awesome photographer. So I was like, I would love that picture. So I went up to him, talked to him, asked him if he could email me the photo. He said, sure. I told him my name, where I'm from, all that good stuff. So a couple of days later, I get a text at, I think came through at maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, because that's the only time when you actually have enough bandwidth for signal to come through to your phone. And it was from a friend I hadn't talked to in years. And it was a link and a message that said, most epic thing I've ever seen, ... And then this link. And I was like, okay. And then the link, it had a photo of me on the surfboard surfing through the playa with this this article title, and it was from The Sun, which is a big publication in the UK. And if you Google Marshall Mosher Burning Man, you'll find a hilarious clickbait title. I know you got to Google it now.
I'm doing it right now.
Of,
doing it as we speak.
Burning Man, where everyone wants to know about it, and there's a lot of stereotypes on Burning Man. So this publication figured, if we can make the most ridiculous sounding title, people will click on it. So the title is, I think I have it memorized now, Inside Burning Man, where 80,000 partygoers dance naked, get high, and enjoy orgies in the Nevada desert. Which, as a burner, that probably happens, but that's definitely not what the event is encompassed in. It's way different than that, but of course that's what people are going to click on. And the guy who was the photographer was a guy that worked for Reuters that must have sold that photo.
Oh my gosh.
to stop rambling on about it, the guy that ran the US for Gravity saw that photo, thought that the surfboard was a flying surfboard. He's like, we got to reach out to this guy. So he happened to be in Atlanta at the time for work, just traveling, and reached out, found me on LinkedIn. We met up. I started talking about what we're doing with Vestigo, and just sort of built a friendship from there. But hilarious story of how I ended up meeting them.
This is amazing. I'm looking at this article right now, and your friend is right. This is one of the most epic photos, and you totally, like, we'll totally put this in the show notes, just the photo, but this is a hell of a surfboard, man. This is amazing. But I'm just like,
thanks.
I'm having such nostalgia looking at these photos, because that was my first burn, and all I remember was just how fucking hot it was. That was, like, I think the hottest year they'd ever had on record, but somehow I'm nostalgic for the playa dust right now. Looking at, I have to close this tab, or I'm just going to literally just go down a rabbit hole of like Pinterest.
Exactly. No, I'm jealous you got a chance to go this year. I was sad I missed it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I didn't go last year. Definitely missed it, and it was kind of my gift to myself. It was like, just cleared a bunch of big milestones with work and needed to kind of unplug for a while, and it was a really powerful experience this year. So I was super glad.
Nice.
Super glad I got the chance to go.
When it's the right timing to go, it can be pretty impactful for sure.
I know, absolutely, and I feel like we've started at a place where this is going to probably be a recurring theme throughout this conversation, where we're talking about the impact of experiences, especially at certain times. So that dear listener, prepare yourself. That's going to be a recurring theme here. But one of the things I remember, we were introduced by our mutual friend Min, and one of the things that stood out to me just right away in our first conversation, and I think everything I've learned about you since, and we're still getting to know each other, but I think one of the areas where I really resonated with you and with what you're up to is you really strike me as someone who's drawn maybe even almost compulsively to push the limits and like challenge what's possible for yourself as a way of helping yourself and the people around you thrive. And first of all, I think that's dope. And I'm curious, like, where did that come from for you? Like, where do you think that's
a good
developed?
question. I don't really know. I'm gonna have to do some like soul searching to figure out where that came from. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I love trying to just kind of better my ability to navigate life, and I'm a huge proponent of using experiences as metaphors for a lot of things that we experience in life, and pushing the limits. Everything is all relative, so something that might feel impossible a year ago, looking back on it, might seem incredibly easy now. Mm-hmm. If you just kind of continue down that road of constantly challenging what you can do and where you think you can go with it. And it's something that I really enjoy, but I don't really know where that initially came from. It might've been from my mom, who just at a young age always really encouraged me to go out and just make the most of experiences and of life and of what's possible. And, never settle for the status quo, and just kind of keep on climbing. And I think that, always stuck with me, and probably ended up translating into a lot of things that I really love in the action adventure sports space now as well. And I really love the learning phase of new things. I'm sort of ADD in terms of different sports. I just love doing all these different things, which is sort of unique because a lot of people stick to, like, let's take mountain biking, for example. People will get into mountain biking, fall in love with it, and they'll be a mountain biker. And as much as I love mountain biking, and I guess I could call myself a mountain biker, I love whitewater kayaking and trail running and paragliding and snowboarding and all these other things that are just different ways to experience the world, mainly because I love that first step of just feeling completely inadequate about something and just figuring it out as you go, the falling down and getting back up. When I get to a certain point where I'm competent in that sport, there's sort of this threshold where I can keep pushing myself in that sport. But if I do that, there can be exponentially increasing consequences to what could happen if things go wrong. So at that point, I usually say, I'm happy being a class 4+, maybe class 5 whitewater kayaker. I don't need to do the class 5+ crazy waterfall stuff. Like, let's learn a new sport, and just enjoy constantly challenging myself while keeping it safe by just trying new things. And there's obviously unlimited amounts of ways that you can continuously challenge yourself by just getting into something that's new that you have no idea how to do and just figuring it out along the way.
Yeah, I so love that because, I think one of the biggest risks that this is one of those things that I think about but don't often talk about, which is the risks of how we self-identify. And what I mean by that is we're as humans, we're meaning-making machines. We're born storytellers. We're telling ourselves and everyone else stories all the time and living inside those stories. And one of the biggest parts of those stories is the labels we put on things, especially ourselves. And so I'm curious, if I were to try to pick a couple words that I think you would resonate with on an identity level, it seems like you really identify yourself with being an explorer, an optimist, and a learner.
That's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. I got to write those down.
Good thing we're recording. Problem solved, my man. What I was starting to wonder about, and I'd love for you to expand on this if you're interested, is what is in the background that connects the dots between those things for you? Like, what is it you're tapping into? My guess is that there's some connective tissue in the background that they all share, even though they obviously look very different on the outside.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. So I've recently started reading a lot of Stephen Kotler's work, who's the author of a book called The Rise of Superman, and studying this kind of mental psychological phenomenon called the flow state, which he did not come up with, but has done a lot of research in terms of how action adventure sports can trigger that flow state a lot faster than other means, and how utilizing that flow state can make us more productive and really tap into our ability for kind of peak human performance in things that are obviously far that transcend just the outdoor adventure sports, but also in work and life. And I think whitewater kayaking is a good example because you're literally floating on a flowing river that when you really tune into the skills that you'll get the more you paddle, you just feel one with this force of nature that in any other environment you would feel panicked and terrified to be in. But because you have the tools of your kayak and your paddle and the mental ability to stay calm and navigate a changing and always different environment purely based on what you've learned how to do and how to react to situations that you don't know are coming, but when they come, you can just almost instinctively, autonomously react to that because of your training and your background. That flow state feeling, I think, is pretty addictive. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs resonate with that, even if they've never done any outdoor adventure sports, because you can tap into the flow state really by doing anything that you love that has creativity or innovation kind of baked into it, that you just feel like you're on a roll. Like those days when you maybe just start pursuing a new idea or a new company, and in the morning you wake up at 5 a.m, and then all of a sudden it's 5 p.m. and you're like, oh, I haven't eaten today. I should probably do that. That's because you're tapped into the flow state of this thing that just makes you so effective and efficient. And outdoor adventure sports are a great catalyst to bring that out. And regardless of whatever you're doing, just being so proficient at something to the point where you can navigate this unknown and changing environment just with your skills and instincts is a pretty incredible mental state to get in. And I love the ability for those kinds of experiences to bring that out. For sure.
No, I love that. Flow. I mean, seeing the way Kotler has built on Csikszentmihalyi's work and sort of the idea of flow and how you can cultivate that and what was his there was his books were, there was The Rise of Superman, and then what was his most recent one about sort of group flow?
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't read that one yet.
Stealing Fire.
Look up the name. Fire. I think I've got it in my there you go.
So I think that's actually a really interesting kind of transition point to, because I feel like that is almost the overlap between everything we've just been talking about and what you guys do at Vestigo. Is you think about the way human perform. I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with Kotler's work on flow, highly recommend checking it out. But I think the punchline is that, at least what I would say is the punchline is that every single possible measure of performance and satisfaction just goes through the roof when someone's in flow. And so the more you can create an environment and conditions where a person or a group of people are in flow, basically everything is going to be way, way better than it could otherwise possibly be. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree.
Also, it'd be great in your own words. How would you explain that most classic and somewhat annoying of American questions of what you do with Vestigo?
That is a very classic question. Yeah, for sure. It's taken us a while to explain what that is and figure out what the main problem we're solving is as well, which I'm sure we'll get to further on in the interview. But in its current state, we essentially help companies to build a culture of innovation. And at first glance, you're like, how does outdoor adventure sports have anything to do with innovation? But as we talk more into this topic and like what you mentioned with flow, the ability to get outside your comfort zone and navigate a changing environment is one of the most crucial aspects of being able to innovate. That there is, of course, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But at the end of the day, you have to be willing to jump headfirst into some new and unknown environment where in all likelihood you will fail, and be willing, and not even willing, eager to seek out that environment takes a particular mindset that can actually be much more accelerated in terms of building through outdoor adventure sports. Just like flow, it's very similar, and a lot of what we do is based off of Csikszentmihalyi's kind of teachings around that. But essentially, it's exposure therapy to challenging and potentially sometimes psychologically stressful environments. And what I mean by that is, take rappelling as an example. If anyone doesn't know what rappelling is, it's the opposite of climbing. You're descending down a rock face on a rope that you're controlling your rate of descent by the amount of friction you're applying to a rope using a particular device that makes it pretty easy to do it. So it's not just grip strength on the rope or anything. But anyone can do that. It's physically very easy. I mean, you're going with gravity. There's no physical strength involved. But mentally, it's very challenging because the number 2 fear in the US is fear of heights. So something that pushes you outside your comfort zone, that taps into some type of mental fear-based challenge in a way that helps you practice navigating that environment, is a massive boost in your ability to do those kinds of things, to navigate unknown and oftentimes scary environments in the office. And it doesn't have to be just through outdoor adventure sports. We've just found that those are the most effective ways to do it. But when I mentioned fear of heights being the number 2 fear in the US, public speaking is actually the number 1 fear.
Yep.
So if you take your team to an improv class or a public speaking kind of training class, I mean, that will bring out similar emotions of getting outside your comfort zone and navigating a unknown environment. That's sort of the basis of what improv is. So just anything that challenges you to push past what you perceive your limits to be in a way that involves your team is extremely effective for creating a culture of innovation that also has a strong foundation in trust, teamwork, and effective communication.
So that all makes perfect sense. And I actually want to dig into it now and go deeper, because I think most people listening to this podcast will probably already be very much on board with the idea of like how trust creates connection, which enhances performance and things like that. But I want to dig into it because I've heard you talk elsewhere that you mentioned the number 2 fear is falling, but I've heard you say elsewhere that actually the fear is not of falling, and it's not even the fear of dying, but it's the fear of losing control. And so I'd love you to unpack that a little bit, and then maybe talk about, you mentioned just a minute ago about the really, how does one cultivate a mindset where we're not just like interested in the discomfort, but in fact eager for it. So talk a little bit about that.
You did some great research, because I have no idea what what interview I even mentioned that on. But you're right. Yeah, that's one thing that I mentioned in all the experiences that I lead that have something to do with heights, at least, is that most people think it's fear of heights or even a fear of falling, or a lot of people say a fear of death at the end, but it's really a fear of not being in control. If you're falling off something tall, you're not scared of the fact that that thing was tall. You're scared about the fact that there's nothing you can do to control the very unpleasant, imminent end that you're going to experience, unless you're over water, I suppose. But that fear of not being in control is goes far beyond that fear of heights. And with the rappelling experience, you are actually falling to get to the bottom, but you're falling in a controlled way. So you do have that control. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of taking your brain's fear of this experience and telling yourself the thing I actually fear is fear of being in control. And I actually am in control right now through this system that I've put in place. And that's one reason why I really like, another reason why I really like all these different outdoor adventure sports is, a lot of people will say, oh, that's, jumping off a mountain and paragliding, that sounds crazy. Why would you ever do that? What happens if your glider just spontaneously bursts into flames? Or just, it's even though you're in an environment like the air that feels very scary, and the higher you go, if for anyone who does a first tandem flight in paragliding, the scarier it's going to feel. In reality, to use paragliding as an example, the higher you go, the safer you are, because the more time you have to fix a problem that might happen. And throughout that entire situation, you are in control through this apparatus that you have around you, the environment you've created to take a experience that would normally feel very uncomfortable and not having control of being suspended up in the air, to actually being able to control every aspect of that through the skills that you have and the gear that you have to ultimately get to where you want to go. So I really like kind of practicing putting myself in those environments where at first psychologically it feels scary, but through the tools and the training and through a lot of the experiences of your teams, oftentimes the help of one another, you can take this environment that feels scary or out of control and successfully navigate that through these different things that you've put in place, including the help of others.
One of the things specifically, while we're on the topic of navigating challenge and uncertainty, basically. I'm really curious about, I've heard you talk about that. One of the things that most people, one of the things that gets missed when people think about like building teams or building trust, or, we're going to go have some sort of experience that we hope will bring us closer together, or whatever the case may be, is, I think you could most broadly call it facilitation, but it's the idea of like a kind of a debrief, right? And talking about the experience that we had and how it applies to what we do and things like that. So talk to me a little bit about how that goes and like what difference that actually makes, especially in cultivating and really developing this mindset you're talking about.
Yeah, the debrief is everything. It is the place where you really connect the dots between what you experienced and how it relates back to the bigger picture. So, a lot of companies that are considering doing something for team building experience, which you mentioned before, we actually hate that word team building because it doesn't, unfortunately, it has a connotation of, oh, well, we did a team building experience because we went to a baseball game the other day, or we did a happy hour the other day. That was team building. So anything that doesn't have a debrief is not real team building, which is why we don't even use that word anymore, because people just immediately associate it with these just trivial group activities that they sort of lump into that team building category. But like, when was the last time you heard of the military doing team building?
No.
Never. But they have some of the most effective teams in the world because their team building is carrying a log across a beach until you can't feel your feet anymore. Putting yourself in these crazy environments and watching how the team comes together because of it. And you bet that they debrief those kinds of experiences for sure. So the debrief is really what's the most important, where we're taking all of these things that might be subconsciously happening in each individual person's head and giving them time to start thinking through what those actually mean realistically for them and for their job in the company. And a lot of times when you're actually in the experience, you might not be thinking at all. You might just be pumped up on adrenaline, and a lot of the neurotransmitters there just immediately going off to kind of keep you in fight or flight mode of just survival. But once you push past that and you have a little bit of time to bring your heart rate down and sort of think through, okay, why did that make me feel that way? How did I push through that? How did I navigate that? Did I react in a way I wanted to react, or did I not? And how come? When you can start talking about those together as a team, you can have some of the most incredibly impactful conversations to really get to know people that you'll ever have in any kind of scenario, because you really dig into what people do when they're uncomfortable or when they're under pressure, when they're in a stressful environment, and why they act that way, and start to really build up some trust and through a little bit of vulnerability with the people that you might have had surface level conversations with forever, but never really dug into that real impactful kind of under the surface kind of psychology that everyone has in a very unique way. So that debrief is incredible for bringing out those kind of personal your personality traits that everyone has, and communicating in a really kind of honest, open way about that, but also how those experiences represent and translate into external factors, and how they serve as an experiential analogy for a particular goal or theme. So if you have a core value that's up on the wall that you walk past every day but don't really ever talk about or put into practice, this is the chance to say, okay, how did that step that you took off the mountain in this rappelling experience link back to that core value of be comfortable with getting uncomfortable, or, whatever the kind of the connection is. How do you take this mindset and apply it back to what your company says is, one of the 3 most important values that you need to exhibit to accomplish the goals that we have as a team? And those are really the things that people think back on as well. So if they're in a stressful environment back in the office, they'll think, oh, well, I was able to jump off this cliff and navigate this really crazy experience. I can definitely push through this. Or, that time that I did that one thing that helped me to really build a connection to this particular value, that's going to resonate with me and stay with me a lot longer and in a much more powerful way, because I had this really strong experience that links back to this particular goal or value that's not quite as abstract as it might have been at one time.
For sure. So that makes sense on a very conceptual level. Could you give me an actual example of when you went through this process and you really saw it make a difference for a group, for a team? They probably walked away with a very different and new understanding of what they meant by that value and what it meant to them.
Yeah, definitely. All kinds of experiences, but there's one story that I really, really like to tell, because it was actually our very first corporate experience. We actually started off as more of a B2C company working with individuals, which I'll get more into the history of that later on. But our very first company that we worked with, we got lucky and actually worked with Home Depot here in Atlanta, which is an awesome first client to have. But the way that got started is that one of their employees, a guy named Spencer Wyckoff, his sister was one of my good friends at the University of Georgia, and I worked pretty closely with her in the Disabilities Resource Center, where I was the graduate assistant, in making just disability awareness and disability access better on campus. So she has muscular dystrophy, which means she's in a wheelchair, and obviously you can't go upstairs in a wheelchair. So, a lot of really historic places at the University of Georgia were only accessible by stairs. So she did this amazing campaign to add in kind of a handicap access ramp around one of the most historic symbols for the University of Georgia, the arch, and all kinds of things that I worked with her back then on. When we graduated, I kind of continued to follow her progress of what her and her brother were doing. And in order to continue just raising awareness for muscular dystrophy and disability accessibility in general, he would carry her on his back through Spartan races. It's hard enough to run a Spartan race on your own, let alone with your sister on your back. And he is this huge, 6'7" guy. It's pretty strong. And I thought that was just an amazing way to continue that mindset. And when we were talking about, what we could do with the Home Depot team, and him being obviously a part of the Home Depot team, I was like, we need to do something to highlight this story, especially given one of your values of family and really feeling like a family team as a unit. Let's do something to continue this story, continue this impact. So we wanted to do something epic that obviously involves an incredible outdoor adventure initiative that would ideally set a world record. So we started thinking, well, what's the most iconic outdoor environment that we have in the Southeast that anyone would know across the country and maybe even across the world? So really the only thing that fits that is the Appalachian Trail, which is one of the biggest continuous trails in the world, definitely in the US, and it starts in Georgia. The Georgia section to the border of North Carolina is about 80 miles, like 78, 79 miles. And it's one of the most difficult in terms of elevation change, just straight up, straight down, like the whole way. It's horrible. So we came up with this crazy idea to carry Cardin across the entire Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail, broken up into 9 different day hikes from road crossing to road crossing, so that different people could join for different days. So it wasn't just one group backpacking the whole thing. So we had anywhere from 15 to 40 people each day come out to hike the trail with us and actually help carry Cardin. So it wasn't Spencer carrying her the entire way. We were taking turns to anyone on the team, the Home Depot team that came out to support, who thought they could help carry. And even if it was for literally 5 steps, or our record was an hour, which is about 1.5 miles per person, doesn't matter how far you carry her, just every single step counts. And everyone played a role, whether it was just getting out there and hiking with us for moral encouragement, or whether it was carrying the gear of the person who was carrying Cardin, or whether it was carrying Cardin herself. Everyone played a crucial role that had a really powerful effect on their team and kind of their sense of family as a family unit. And we there were some days when we honestly didn't know if we would be able to finish, and we made it, but we finished. We actually finished a day early as well. We were ahead of schedule, and set a world record through it. Had an incredibly impactful story, got some decent press and news out of it. And now we actually haven't announced this yet, but we're pretty close to announcing it. The next initiative we're going to do is to create a similar operation, but this time it will be one group that goes the full way, and not the Appalachian Trail, but Kilimanjaro. So we're going to carry Cardin up Mount Kilimanjaro and then paraglide off the top to set another world record, because that's never been done in that fashion.
I love it. What an exciting next thing to do. So take me back to that. That's an amazing story, but take me back to the debrief after that. Right. And what did you see happen when you talked a lot about like this family value that Home Depot had, but what did you see happen specifically, like for whether it was one person or a small group of people who were involved in that experience? Like, how did that actually impact them? And what did you see? Like, what was the shift that you saw working with that team afterwards?
There were some really incredible realizations that came out of it. So to share one, and there were a bunch, but I'd say one of the most impactful ones was how you felt when you were actually carrying Cardin. And we didn't really, I mean, everyone felt this way to a degree, but we didn't realize how prolific it was and how profound it was until the debrief, when we all sort of talked about it. But when you're carrying a backpack, you're just like, I hate this backpack. I hate the fact I have to carry this 60-pound thing across this trail. But when you're carrying Cardin, I mean, she's double the weight of a heavy backpacker bag at about 120 pounds. And she actually helps you go further than you think you would be able to go, because your backpack is now a person who is whispering encouragement into your ear every step of the way, and really making it this incredibly just motivational team effort of just understanding that every step you take, especially when you're going up one of those steep elevation gains that are prolific on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, just every step you take is getting us one step further to something that would be impossible without your help. Even if you can only take 5 steps, that's 5 steps closer. And it was just amazing to see people break their own personal limits of what they thought they could do, because of what that meant to the initiative and to Cardin, in a way that they never would have done on their own. I'm convinced that even if some of these people had half the weight of a heavy 60-pound backpacker bag, they would have given up and stopped on the side of the mountain, just dropped it and been like, I'm just leaving this here. I can't do this anymore. But just knowing that as much as it sucked every single step, at least you can take steps and you can walk, and you're doing this for someone who can't, empowering her to do this thing that would be impossible without you. It's just a powerful motivation place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much, humans thrive on meaning and purpose. And that is that's a very visceral, real thing. I love that story. So I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think of, as I was listening to that, I was trying to think of how to how I would translate this. So obviously the best thing to do if you're interested in creating these types of experiences for your team is to call Marshall and hire Vestigo. But if someone's not in a position to do that, or whatever, that just for whatever set of reasons that isn't in the cards for them, I'd love you to like, what are one or two things that, say, a product leader, leader of a product team or a product organization, how can they bring this back into their culture, into their world? Like, how can they use, what are some of the lessons that you've picked up over the years that they could actually apply, whether or not they're able to cultivate to create an experience like the one you just described?
Yeah, definitely. It's easier than people think. And, as much as I would love to work with any company that would like to invest in this, you definitely don't have to hire a company to do it. I think the biggest message that I just hope people take away is just do something that's more meaningful and more impactful than a baseball game or a happy hour. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. But just like you said, humans resonate with stories, and making something about a bigger purpose than whatever the thing on the surface looks like goes a long way. So what we've started doing for a lot of our experiences, because we are doing more of these recurring experiences as more of a mental mindset training program throughout the course of a year. So we'll do monthly experiences for 25 different employees each time. As a way to add all those experiences into a single theme, what we've started doing is saying every foot and elevation gain per person throughout all these different experiences, whether it's, hiking or climbing or caving, whatever it is, every foot and elevation gain per person adds up to this overall theme of the height of Mount Everest of 29,000 feet. So that creates this really visual goal that people have in their head and a story behind that goal. And especially if you can tie a really powerful team value to that goal of saying, the summit of Mount Everest, which is the collective effort of all of our work and training throughout all these different experiences, represents this one particular goal or value, then that goal or value is going to have so much more meaning to it than it would otherwise. So just try to find unique ways to create experiences that tap into the bigger purpose meaning behind a particular goal or value that you have as a company. And that will create a stronger connection to that value and help people resonate with that value in a bigger way. And if you can create a philanthropic focus built into that as well, then that's even better. Like what we did with Cardin and Home Depot. We've actually replicated that with a couple other companies where obviously that was a very unique situation. With some other companies, we weren't carrying someone, but we also emulated that section of that trip through doing that section of the Appalachian Trail in a similar way. But every mile hiked per person went towards fundraising for a organization that was sort of near and dear to one of their values as a company that supported something that they really believed in. So having a philanthropic approach in addition to creating meaning goes a long way as well. But the biggest benefit is going to come when you have the combination of creating higher purpose meaning, philanthropic value, and the kind of goals and values you have as a company all merged into one campaign of multiple experiences or one experience will create a good outcome.
It makes a lot of sense. One of the things I actually want to push in a little bit deeper here, because I feel like there's one or two more kind of bedrock principles that, because one of the things it seems like you've had to get very good at, and maybe you always were good at this, or maybe it's something you acquired through the course of what you've been doing. And again, we're going to shift to talk a little bit more about some of those pivots and the history of Vestigo here in just a minute. But you're someone who's clearly had to think deeply about experience design, right? And how you don't just take a stock experience, but how do you customize that to achieve a certain outcome, to deepen certain values and experiences and meaning, like you were just describing. One of the things I've heard you talk about is that a lot of your work is, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it was predicated on Brene Brown's work, really around vulnerability in particular, which is, I think, a really important idea. And it's one of those things that people can get a little bit squeamish about, which I think is unfortunate, but I think it is also somewhat reflective of where we are today. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, so if let's say, let's do a little hypothetical here. Let's imagine that I'm like a director of product for a startup in Silicon Valley, right? So I oversee a couple product managers and several product teams. I'm part of the leadership group of a whole product organization here. And I'm really thinking about, I'm not just spending all my cycles thinking about the products itself. I'm also thinking about the environment, the people, their development, et cetera. As I go forward trying to create some experiences for my people to grow, to build trust, to really get to know each other better, to connect much more deeply than they would otherwise, what are the things that I need to keep in mind that we haven't already covered?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first step of all of our experiences is bringing in a speaker, or at the very least, delivering content, whether it's a podcast like this or a YouTube video, to help people get in the right mindset to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's a really powerful and important launching point that I think can definitely be achieved if the main focus is on vulnerability by watching Brené Brown's TED Talk, or even reading her book if you want a little bit more of a in-depth kind of mindset shift before you even get started. So putting people in the right mental framework before launching into an experiential form of a lot that we've talked about can really go a long way, because people already have that framework of understanding why what we're about to do or what we're currently doing is important and how it is going to relate back to some of those takeaways that we want. So it can really be done as easily as watching a YouTube video, or if you really want to do it in a bigger way, like what we do, we always bring in a keynote speaker to talk to the company about. Usually it's someone who's done something amazing in the outdoor adventure space. Like we had Colin O'Brady come in recently to talk to one of our groups before launching a campaign with them, where he just set the world record for the first person to walk across Antarctica solo and unsupported, dragging a 300-pound sled full of all his food and supplies the whole way. And no one's ever done that. Amazing story. Ever. Yeah. Unsupported, which means, no dogs, no wind power, just you and your two legs. Right. Which, when you have someone like that come talk to your company, people, everything's relative. So that story just makes people understand how the only thing that he had that was special, I mean, he doesn't even have that much polar exploration experience. The main factor was his ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other, which purely comes from mindset and your willingness to just keep pushing yourself. So when you have a story like that, it really inspires the hell out of everyone to want to challenge themselves in that way as well. So it really helps to jumpstart a program and give a lot more power and impact to it.
I love that. No, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was, especially considering like the idea of vulnerability in Brené Brown's work is how can you help people move? It's basically, how do you help people move into discomfort? Because there's always some resistance to that idea. But I think what you just said is a really cool way of doing that. Are there any others you've noticed? Like if you know that there's going to be, you can imagine every team leader deals with this. Every organizational leader deals with this. There are just moments of discomfort, moments where you're like, yeah, this is going to be tough. And what have you seen about how to help lead a group of people into what you already know and they already know is going to be uncomfortable?
Yeah, for sure. One of the most important things is for that team leader is just being great at exhibiting and demonstrating what you're trying to preach. So to go back to that vulnerability piece, if we're taking a team out rappelling, then we'll actually sit down with that product leader or the CEO or whoever the leader is that's on that experience and say, it is going to go a long way for your group if let's say you are assuming you're somewhat terrified of this as well, especially if you have a prolific fear of heights, tell the group that. Say like, I'm scared as shit right now, guys. I don't know if I can do this. And use that team support to go first and accomplish it and just be vulnerable. Don't try to to be the macho leader that we feel like we need to be, and just be vulnerable with the team about how you're feeling if you're feeling that way. And that gives everyone sort of this unspoken permission to feel that way as well, because they're all feeling it too. And, whether it's back in the office and in accomplishing this really ambitious deadline that you have in launching this new product as a product leader, it's okay to exhibit that vulnerability yourself. And when you do that yourself, you just immediately get the trust and buy-in of your team to perform in a way that is built on trust and teamwork instead of on some other values that sometimes come with the type A personality of just competition and you looking the best instead of creating the best outcome for the team.
Yeah, for sure. So conversely then, so that's what people should do when, you could look at what you're describing here as sort of a microcosm of a larger type of cultural shift that a leader might want to undertake in their organization. What do leaders, or what do most people who are trying to affect some sort of cultural or environmental change in their teams or their organizations, what do they usually, from what you've seen, like, where does this go wrong? Where do they trip and fall and get in their own way? And like, how does, what do basically most people think is going to work that never works?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I've got to kind of preface this by saying, we only see this from the outside, in terms of the companies that we work with. But a lot of times when it doesn't work well or when people aren't willing to exhibit that vulnerability, to kind of go back to what I was saying before, it's as impactful as it is when you take the things I was just saying and put them into practice and exhibit that vulnerability with your team. It's equally detrimental if you don't. And I wouldn't share specific names, but there's definitely companies we've seen that, unfortunately, the leader just doesn't get that and does that, and we see how it affects the rest of the team, and ultimately your ability to achieve the overall team goal that you're shooting for, diminishes. So it can be bad if you don't put those into practice. Just as much as it could be good if you do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It really reminds me of one of my, I think you and I share a massive fandom for this person. So one of my favorite authors and thinkers and optimists is Simon Sinek, who I think you're also quite a fan of. And have you seen his new book, by the way? Have you checked it out?
I haven't yet. No, I really want to. Have you?
Yeah. The Infinite Game. Highly recommend it. We'll link to it in the show notes, of course.
Yeah,
but
Start With Why is one of my favorites. So it's
all of his work is fantastic, but I have to confess, as a quick aside here, quick side thing. I've been waiting for this book for 2 years. I've followed the development of, I've watched I could see in his different things that I was following him developing these ideas. And I literally woke up at 6 a.m. excited to read that book on launch day and devoured the entire thing by lunch. It was that good.
I love how most people felt that way of waiting in lines for Harry Potter and waiting for Game of Thrones to come out. And you're the same way with Simon Sinek. It's great.
Oh my God. I am that much of a nerd. I am definitely.
This stuff's incredible.
Yeah, but I mean, if you ever needed proof that I'm a total geek for building teams and products, there you go.
Right.
But where was I going? I had a reason I brought that up. What was it? But I think the reason that's why. Okay, so the reason I thought of that was there's a whole thing in there where he talks. One of the core pillars he talks about in playing the Infinite Game is building trusting teams, which is exactly what his last book, Leaders Eat Last, was all about. And one of the examples he gave that I was really surprised by, but in retrospect makes perfect sense, was the Navy SEALs, right? So the Navy SEALs is perhaps one of the most elite performance organizations ever, and certainly in current existence. And I don't think anybody would debate that. And he gave several examples, and he talked how at length, and you kind of sort of alluded to this earlier when you talked about sort of the activities that really engender trust between people, like carrying a log around on a beach until you can't move, basically. That's definitely a part of SEAL training. But he talked about literally the SEALs value trust and trustworthiness over performance. Like they have a holistic view of a candidate to be a SEAL, and that they actually, ahead of someone's technical capabilities, they value trustworthiness and the ability for those people to like bond and be to meld into a unit. And I thought that was amazing. Like the most elite performance group that I know of values something more than performance.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I've had some friends that have come from the military background that have told me that in training for the SEALs team or Marines or anything else, it's not necessarily what happens when you say you can't keep going, or when you fall, but what happens when you get back up and how you support your team to keep going instead of thinking about yourself. So I think they used this activity that something like they were swimming some crazy distance in the ocean, like next to a boat until like you couldn't swim anymore and you drown or something, and you have multiple people, and they were looking for when one person would help someone that couldn't keep going, not necessarily the fact that you could go the longest, but when you can help your team that feels like they can't keep going. That's really what that's what they're looking for. Best outcome is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that, right? Because it's especially because so many people in certainly in business, they excel as an individual contributor, and then because of that, they get promoted to a position of at least some level of authority or assumed leadership, right? Like they run a team or whatever the case may be, and it's a totally different thing where suddenly you're not responsible for the work anymore. You're responsible for the people who are responsible for the work. And it's like, well, what do you do? It's not when do you fall down? It's what do you do when that person falls down next to you? And I just think it's a really great analogy. So
yeah, I think there's one of the issues is that sometimes people will have this I want to look better personally rather than the team looking better as a whole, and just understanding that it's it's a team effort when you're a part of a company, and really helping to build that trust and collaborative nature so that people don't withhold information or backstab people or whatever like that, just to make themselves look good.
Yeah. Or even even if it's nothing nefarious, like just they might fake it, right? They might be faking that they know something or whatever, but whatever the case may be, you're not getting access. You're blocking people from actually stepping into their full level of performance and potential and all that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that's a great transition point. I want to talk more about Vestigo now and your journey as a company leader, as a leader of a product. And I think where I want to start is, Vestigo's had to make some tough calls over the years, right? You guys have been around for 4.5 years now, I think.
For sure. Yeah.
About 4.5 years now. And where you started, your entire product strategy and vision for where you started seems like maybe your vision hasn't shifted, but certainly the product you were putting out in the world where you started is radically different than where you are now. And I'd love you to talk to me about that pivot. Talk to me about the B2B to the B2C pivot.
So
B2C to B2B. There we go.
Yeah. I can't keep the acronym straight either.
Too many letters and numbers.
Right. Exactly. When we first got started, I was personally really passionate about helping people take that first step experience with the end goal, not necessarily being better, more effective, productive teams, because we were working with individuals. The goal was my personal experience as a guide with the outdoor rec program at the University of Georgia, where we'd take students on usually first step experiences in all these different outdoor adventure sports, which is the time when I fell in love with a lot of these things. I saw firsthand how learning how to whitewater kayak, saved some friends from drugs and depression, and getting into even something as simple as hiking helped other friends lose 30, 40 pounds and be more active and healthy just because they're having fun on the weekend. But this kind of fun translates into amazing personal health benefits, both physically and mentally. So I just wanted to help unlock those first step experiences, which tended to be why people didn't do them in the first place, because they just didn't know anyone who they could show them those experiences, and weren't just going to go try it on their own. And I wanted to make it easier for someone to find a local that could guide them on those kinds of experiences. So the first idea was exactly what Airbnb Experiences is now doing. They started about 2 years after we started, but for anyone who doesn't know what Airbnb Experiences is, it's the same model as Airbnb, the sharing economy model, but instead of a guide or instead of a host, hosting their house, they're hosting a guided experience. Whether that's a photography tour around a city or surfing lessons, off the coast of, wherever your house is. I think at first it was paired with like, if you were a host, you could also lead experiences, but now it's this completely separate thing where it doesn't have really anything to do with staying in a house. It's just connecting local guides who can facilitate these really awesome experiences with people who want to do something cool on the weekend, whether they're traveling or not. And that was the original idea for Vestigo, specifically in the outdoor adventure world, because there were a couple issues with the outdoor adventure guiding world. For one, it's just a lot of old school mom and pop shops. Mm-hmm. And if you're a guide, most of the guides are, college students that are just doing something for like summer beer money. Like, let's use whitewater rafting as an example. You're never going to go whitewater rafting and like ask your guide for business advice. And they're probably not going to connect the themes of what you experienced on the river back to like any higher level purpose. So when we first started creating this platform, we were similar, but we wanted eventually to have these experiences be more meaningful than just taking people on that first ever experience. So we started playing around with working with companies and connecting more of the dots between what you're experiencing going through this really impactful first step experience back to how you can actually take a business outcome from that experience. And there were a couple of reasons why we made the shift, in addition to just wanting to have a bigger impact and connect the dots on how that actually can translate into your life and your work in a bigger way. But the main reason was that just building a B2C company is really hard and takes a lot of funding. The cost to acquire a new user is relatively high. And it just takes a lot of advertising and marketing. So we started having some companies reach out to us to do company experiences. We started catering more to that and realized that the first 2 or 3 company experiences we led blew the revenue numbers out of the water from what we could get from just the B2C side.
Sure.
And the impact was higher, both in connecting the dots between how the experience actually relates to other factors outside of that experience, but also in the sense that people that were coming with their companies sometimes were people that never in a million years would have signed up for this on their own. Even if there was a tech platform that made it really easy to do so, they would just be like, no, I'm never doing that. And oftentimes we would notice, because we do pre and post surveys, we would notice the people that were the least excited for it were oftentimes the people who were the most scared about doing it. But after they did it, they were the ones that had the biggest impact. We realized that working with companies on the B2B side actually opened the door for us to work with more people than we ever would be able to work with on the B2C side, because those people just wouldn't ever sign up to take that first step in the first place. But when doing it with their company and supported by their coworkers and peers, it helped them to take that first step. So there were a couple of reasons why we made the shift. Honestly, the biggest reason was because B2B kept the lights on and B2C didn't.
Sure.
Unless we went out and fundraised, which we didn't want to do. So working with companies was way better from a financial standpoint, but all the impact kind of metrics that we were seeing were actually a lot higher on the B2B side as well. And we were really excited by where that could take us.
So was that a hard choice for you though?
Yeah, it was for sure. So I had this dream of making this super techie outdoor adventure company like what Airbnb Experiences ended up doing. And I had just come back from Singularity University, where I know you participated in that program as well. And we just have this mindset of, think 10x bigger that Peter Diamandis drills into our head whenever we talk to him. And just the idea of switching from a very techie B2C outdoor adventure platform to essentially services-based company that I have no idea how this can scale bigger than for every one input we put into it, we get one output is definitely not scalable like the B2C side was. And it was really hard for me to take that tech excitement that I had coming out of Singularity University and say, the most important thing before we can talk about how we bring this to, a million or a billion or however many billion people. The first real problem was, how do we just pay our rents as a company? How do we make this work financially?
Yeah.
So I had to put my, business owner hat on and sort of take off my aspirational, big tech company, entrepreneur kind of just make it work. And now we're finally starting to get back to that idea of how we can make this more back, kind of bring the tech company piece back into it, how we can scale it a little bit more. And we're doing a lot of really amazing work with virtual reality experiences and a lot of other exciting stuff from a tech perspective to bring it to a bigger audience, scale a little bit more than just the services-based company could. But without what we did before, I don't think we would still be around today to do what we want to do in the future.
Oh, for sure. And so the decision, it's hindsight's 2020. Looking back, it makes perfect sense. But and we're going to move on here to the future of where you guys are going next in a second. But I think there's actually some really valuable lessons in making that hard choice that I want to dig into for a second. So, I'm trying to empathize with who else might be, the people who might be listening to this. And one thing that comes to mind is, this is your baby, right? You've thought about this thing. You've dreamed about this thing. You've poured yourself into this thing and it's not working, right? It's not working and it sucks. And that is such a rough place to be. Like that decision. And first of all, like the honesty it takes is impressive. So good on you for that. But I'm really take me back to where there's always a moment I've found where you finally realize the totality of the situation, and then you have to really make a decision. So if you would take me back to when was that, and how did you finally make this decision? Because I'm sure, well, if you're anything like me, you probably dragged your feet a little bit longer. It probably took longer than otherwise should have. If had you known then what you know now. But take me back to that and tell me about what was that like? What did that feel like? How did you do it? How did you and your co-founder deal with it? How'd the team? Tell me that story.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it was more difficult than it should have been because I made it psychologically and mentally more difficult than it should have been. I almost felt like, coming back from this super tech focused incubator like Singularity University, I almost felt like a bit of a failure of not focusing on just what the high tech solution was and just saying, we're going to create outdoor experiences that impact companies. I don't know what about that is techie other than the fact that we had a way more expensive website than we should have. But I sort of, for a solid amount of time, I almost felt embarrassed to catch up with some other friends from Singularity, just in the sense that I just felt like I wasn't living up to that exponential dream that we're constantly reminded of. But one thing that really helped me was I try to get as much advice as possible from other entrepreneurs, especially in the community here in Atlanta, that were doing something similar that I looked up to, that I felt like their model had something similar to do with us. So one story that is good to share that I really took a lot away from was a company called Roadie here in Atlanta. If you've ever wished you could hire an Uber driver just to send your backpack that your friend left in your car back to their house instead of driving it back there, that's what Roadie is. They're Uber for shipping.
Okay.
I've actually called an Uber once to, apparently you can just drop things off in Uber and they'll take us to the destination, but I don't think you're supposed to do that. But Roadie, it's using the exact same model as Uber to ship things. So a very B2C company, but most of their revenue comes from businesses on the B2B side. So after talking to their founder, I was trying to figure out, how do you solve this chicken and the egg problem of a B2C platform idea where you have to cater to both the supply and the demand at the same time in the same place with a very low budget. And he was telling me how they worked pretty extensively with companies to actually fund the early days of the platform. So one example with Roadie is that Delta, also headquartered in Atlanta, is obviously a massive airline, and the Atlanta airport is one of the biggest airports in the world. Whenever you fly into Atlanta on Delta and your bag, for whatever reason, doesn't get on that flight with you, you don't have to hang out at the airport until the next flight comes in. You just go to wherever you want to go, and Delta will deliver that bag to you. Well, they have to do that somehow, and Roadie is a great way to do that. So Roadie sold Delta to be their solution to delivering lost or delayed baggage to those customers. So even though they are a very B2C company, and on the outside you would never know that they work with a lot of companies, most of their revenue, or at least this was years ago when I talked to them at the time, came from B2B engagements. So that sort of got me thinking, well, maybe we can actually still make this B2C platform idea work. We'll just go out and do the same thing, work with companies, develop a bunch of engagements with companies that can then be a great lead gen in terms of getting those individual employees to come back, use the platform, maybe with their family or friends on another experience, and really fund the company through B2B revenue. So we did that for a while. We did a combination of the two. The only difference was that even though Roadie brilliantly found a B2B way to make revenue to fund the B2C side, they didn't just use that to fund the B2C side. They also raised, like $4 or $5 million, and their founder had a successful exit before that and all that kind of stuff, which we didn't have, and we were first time founders. So we realized that we were just still, it was making the company profitable, which was great, but we're still operating on a bootstrap budget, and just, we couldn't do both at the same time. So we decided, turn off the B2C side, maybe temporarily, maybe forever, focus on the B2B side, and we can always bring focus on the B2B side. Now I'm mixing up my acronyms. We can always bring back.
I'm just going to say business side and consumer, because the acronyms are killing me right now. I shouldn't have said
exactly. Yeah.
So all right. So you make the tough call to shelve the consumer angle, go with the business side, because you can actually see a pathway to not only profitability but sustainability. But one of the things I'm curious about, like in that moment or through that process, if it did, how did that affect your vision in your team? Like, did you see this as just an alternate path and a different strategy to the same vision? Or was this like you had to go through the entire thing of saying, wow, I like the picture on the puzzle the picture on the outside of the puzzle box is changing. Like how big of a shift was this?
Well, it was a bit easier for me in terms of convincing the team, because they were really the ones convincing me to go to the B2B side. They were all very much for it. And I was really the one that was hesitating. So
why were you hesitating?
It was for a lot of those reasons I described earlier about I just wanted to be a tech company CEO, and it felt like I wasn't a tech company anymore if I just went the B2B route.
Going back to identity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, kind of going back to the identity thing you were talking about. So I sort of had to just get out of my own way to do what we had to do to make it work. But the team was all on board with working with B2B. I mean, it was obvious from a revenue standpoint. Like after we did more in revenue from like the first 3 engagements with companies that we did in the previous year or something crazy like that.
It was just clear.
It was pretty clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too hard to get them on board.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you just sharing all that so openly, and I can actually directly personally empathize with the experience you had after SU. SU is for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's an amazing program, but it's so, you want to talk about a group of people who are good at experience design. That is a group of people who are very, very effective at experience design. And when I say that, I mean is anyone who goes through that program is deeply impacted by it. And so much so that it actually takes a while to kind of like, once you leave that bubble, it takes a while to kind of sort yourself out about, wait, like what do I do with all this stuff? Like it's pretty, I mean, it's a whole other, we could talk about that alone for at least an hour.
For sure.
But I hear you, man. I totally, I feel you, brother. So talk to me now about, so you made this pivot a couple years ago, like keep the lights on pivot, made a lot of sense. One thing you mentioned was you started seeing the impact was actually greater. So I'm curious, like, what are the metrics you look at to assess your impact? And did those change before and after the pivot?
Yeah, so we actually were not that focused on impact before the pivot. As makes sense because the rest of the industry wasn't focused on it. Like if you go whitewater rafting, they're not going to send you a survey that said like how much did this impact you as a person or their team, and they might send you a survey that was like how good was your experience generically, but it's more of how much fun did you have instead of how much did you learn or grow from this experience. So we really started measuring the impact once we started working with companies, and it actually took us a while to figure that out too, because in the beginning, we were just about let's create epic experiences that are just way better from a generic team building standpoint than the alternatives. And that's sort of why we hate the words team building now, because that was sort of the old model of what we were doing. And we would work, mainly with HR. And every time we would say, what are the main outcomes you want to have? They would just generically, like literally every time, generically say, we just want people to get to know each other better. We're hiring a lot of people, and just building relationships is really important to us, which is not wrong. And that's very true. But that's a very generic thing for literally every single company to tell us. And we're like, every company is different. There's got to be more specific outcomes for each individual company. And we didn't really realize that until we started talking with the VPs, the CEOs, sometimes the director of product, and just people that were had more of the vision for, where are we going, instead of more of the HR mindset of just kind of general relationship building, trust building, which are all great. But when we started hearing the problems from the leadership of what is the big issue you have as a company, a lot of it stemmed from we really need to build a stronger culture of innovation in the standpoint of how can we move faster, encourage our employees to jump into a new problem, not be afraid of the unknown. So that's really when we started creating more of a focus on using these experiences in as a part of the learning and development initiatives of companies and the executive training of companies rather than the HR initiatives of companies. So that was kind of a big lesson for us to learn. And now I completely forgot your original question after I sort of
It's all good. I had asked you what are the impact metrics you look at? Like, and I think the larger question I'm getting at or wondering about is, let's say I'm, we'll continue with our example here. Let's say I'm a leader in a company, right? A team leader, and whether or not my overall company is going through some sort of cultural transformation and is like actively on board with that, like independent of that, let's say I have a vision for what I want the culture to be in just in my team, in the orbit I'm directly affecting, and I'm taking steps to do it. Like we've talked about a bunch of that already. One of the questions I would ask is, if I'm that person, how do I know if it's working? Like, what do you look at to know if this is working? What do you steer by?
Yeah. So measuring the impact is definitely challenging because there's so many factors that kind of go into your bottom line as a company. But there's several ways that we approach it. And there's several things that we're developing and we're really excited for the future in terms of more effective ways to approach it. So traditionally, the industry kind of around learning and development has measured impact through surveys. So, surveys are great. We can do pre and post surveys for every individual experience and every person that goes through those experiences and ask really targeted questions that can help us to figure out how much of an impact those individual people had, and then measure that throughout the course of time after multiple experiences and see how that's changing. Things like how much did this experience affect your ability to navigate unknown environments? How supported do you feel by your team during times of turmoil or stress? All kinds of things that can directly translate back into your team's ability to get outside their comfort zone and navigate change and adaptability.
Sure.
But we also try to measure some company-wide stats if they will give it to us. Things like just how has your revenue changed as a company? And there's so many other factors that go into that, but also your retention rate, attrition rate, things like that. It tends to have a really big effect on attrition rate. Like for instance, a lot of the numbers that we see drop attrition rates, so the number of people leaving each year by around 25 to 75%.
Wow.
Somewhere in that kind of 40 to 50 usually. So like our last company that we measured had a pretty consistent 14% attrition rate every year. And then after the first year of working with us, it dropped down to 7. So just the retention aspect alone is pretty incredible. But in terms of measuring the actual innovation impact and your team's ability to innovate and create, that's definitely a little bit more challenging. But through those reports and surveys, we can get a good sense for an idea on how that hopefully impacts your team. And hopefully we see a change in the company's revenue ultimately. But there's so many other factors that go into that. One of the other things that we're developing that we're really excited about that definitely goes back to more of the high-tech Singularity University approach to things is that we're working with a neuroscientist to create an innovation score, essentially measuring the decrease in brain activity in the part of the brain that's associated with fear and your ability to push through that fear. If anyone's ever seen the movie Free Solo with Alex Honnold, who free climbed El Cap in Yosemite, there's a part of the movie where he gets an MRI to figure out there must be something wrong with his brain to do this. Yep. And they noticed that he has he's very resilient to things that usually cause more stimulation in the part of your brain that's associated with fear. Obviously, because he exposes himself to pretty crazy environments on a daily basis, sort of exposure therapy. Well, really similar to that, we actually can measure that as well through consumer grade, FDA approved technology, a headset that you can put on that measures certain parts of your brain while you're experiencing the activity, after you experience the activity, and actually measure a decrease in the activation of that part of your brain that's normally associated with fear and your ability to push past fear. There's different parts of the brain that are associated with different factors that ultimately lead to what that innovation score would be.
This is so fascinating because I think neuroscience is totally fascinating, and the way the brain works is sort of the seat of all this. So did you guys hack a Muse headband to measure the activation of the amygdala? Is that what you're doing?
Pretty much, yeah.
I love it.
So there's a couple of different companies that are making headsets. Yeah, Muse is one of them, but there's a bunch of really exciting consumer grade tech that's out there that we can use.
For sure. So it actually reminds me for some reason, the reason will be obvious in a second. There's a conference at a community that another podcast guest introduced me to that I think you might find very interesting for exactly what we're talking about here. And it's actually also out of the SU universe. Are you familiar with the Transformative Technology Conference? Does that ring a bell?
Sounds familiar.
Basically, the entire idea is how do you use tech for sort of inner well-being, cognitive flourishing.
Nicole Bradford, probably.
Yes, Nicole Bradford.
She was in my class.
Okay,
yep.
So there you go. So
I know about her conference. I didn't realize that was the name. But yeah, she does amazing stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like you guys should reconnect and look into this some more because there's a lot of stuff. I went last year. I'm going to go again this year. It's in about a month, and there's a lot of tech there that is really, really interesting that I feel like is going to be in line with the kind of transformative experiences you're trying to cultivate through your work. So just as a quick note, check it out. And you too, dear listener, you too, check them out. So yeah, tell me a little bit more and then we'll kind of shift gears and start to wrap up here, but tell me a little bit more about what's next for Vestigo. Where are you going? You mentioned VR, but tell me a little bit about what we could expect to see next.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so the neuroscience thing, that's something we're really excited about because that is, there's a lot of players in the kind of L&D, peak performance, innovation training, executive training space. No one has a better solution than surveys. And we're just a small fish in that space for sure. So if we can create a approach that's actually based on science, then that'd be pretty exciting. So that's something that we're really interested in building out further. The virtual reality, like we mentioned before, is really exciting. So that was actually a bit of a heated topic for us as a team because obviously we're a bunch of people that are passionate about people getting outside and using those experiences for growth. And the idea of essentially using video games as an alternative for that was not the most exciting idea for a lot of our team. And I definitely share that as well. But the fact of the matter is that no company is going to force their employees to go on an experience with us.
Yep.
And the easiest experience we can create still will not make everyone feel comfortable. There's always going to be a percentage of employees that even an easy hike, they're like, nope, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. But those people oftentimes will put on a VR headset in an office. So if you think of kind of the ability to jump into these new and unknown environments as a scale from 0 to 10, and let's say an easy entry level hike is maybe a 2, there's still people that are at the 0 and the 1 scale, which is normal. And we don't want to leave them out of this experience.
Yeah.
So the virtual reality has been a really great way to come into the office, put people in an experience that they are not expecting is going to be as difficult as it is, and have them start to have an experiential form of that mindset shift using something that can be done in 30 minutes instead of taking the entire team out to an actual experience. So one activity that we use, this is not one that we developed ourselves, it's been around for a while, the virtual reality plank walk experience, where you've probably done it before.
I did something similar, but keep going.
So essentially you have a wooden plank that's on the ground that when you set up, you scan the plank and to make sure the dimensions are the same. And then you put the headset on and you're in this virtual environment with an elevator. You walk onto the elevator, go to the top floor. And when the elevator opens, this plank is now coming out of the elevator that looks like you're on the roof of 300, 400, 500 foot building. You're high. I don't know how high it is, but it gets your heart going. And when you step up on this real plank, 'cause there's a real plank on the ground, the headset knows where you are in space. And as you move across the plank, you're actually moving across the real plank, and it plays creaking sounds in your headset. So it tricks your brain very effectively into feeling like you're on this plank that if you fall off, you're going to die. It gets your heart rate going in a way that is remarkably immersive. So we can use this experience to create a very similar mindset shift that rappelling can experience. It's obviously never going to be as impactful as the real thing, but it works to some extent. So we can use these experiences for people that just would never sign up for the real experience, in the hope that it can be that first step experience on an easier, kind of more accessible way to then get people to continue on the real experiences. And the other cool factor with virtual reality is that with the new headsets that are out, especially with the Oculus Quest, which is what we use, you don't have to be hooked up to a big fancy gaming computer to run it, but the quality is still very high.
Wow.
Which is the first time a headset has had very high immersive quality that doesn't require a gaming computer. This is really the first headset that I think could start creating mass adoption of virtual reality, because no one's going to buy a big fancy gaming computer to run a VR headset, but people will buy the Oculus Quest, and it's almost as good.
Wow.
I mean, if you don't, I own a Oculus Rift as well that is amazing, but I had to do the exact same experience on both headsets side by side to even notice the difference. It's incredible.
Wow. Okay.
So because of that, we can actually ship those VR headsets with all the content already loaded on it to remote employees and have them in the same virtual space with the employees that are here in town to do an experience that everyone's a part of, regardless of whether you're in Australia or the US. So we can break down these physical barriers in a way that previously were impossible to break outside of a plane ticket, purely by mailing them a headset, which is pretty incredible.
I love that. I am totally adding Oculus Quest to my little Amazon wish list and going to go play with this thing.
You should. It's pretty amazing. And they actually, with just a software update, are going to be able to remove the need for the controllers and just track your hands. So you'll have virtual hands just with the cameras on the front of the headset. And then next year, they're coming out with the Oculus Horizon, which, if there are any Ready Player One fans out there, is sort of similar to the Oasis. which is sort of scary that Facebook's building the Oasis, but that's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole other topic, but it's a really good point.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of that. I'm like, wow, you're basically doing Ready Player One for people to help them go through these experiences, which is awesome. And
yeah, I mean, outside of the scary implications of what could happen if the Ready Player One style world happens and Facebook controls that, the cool factor is that you're now going to have access to these really amazing virtual environments. So you can interact with people in a way that's going to feel like you're actually there with them. And that already exists right now. It's just not as good. Things like Altspace, VR chat, ways that you can interact with other virtual avatars. But it's it looks, from what I can tell, to be a much higher end version of those things in a way that's a lot more accessible.
There's a podcast episode that I'm trying to find right now that I feel like touches on exactly this. Let me just find it really quick. It's on the podcast it's a podcast called Distributed by Matt Mullenweg, who's the founder of WordPress, or Automatic, the company behind WordPress. It was this idea of having live virtual co-experiences, sort of live virtual experiences where like you're over there, maybe you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, but we are live in virtual reality together and sharing some sort of experience. And it was sort of trying to apply that to, I think, to the workplace to really get over, like, for example, the video conferencing problem, where it's like, oh, video conferencing it's great, but it's still not the same as like being in the same room at a whiteboard with somebody, for example. Yes, which is one of those things that I think would be so dope to see somebody solve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the things we're really excited about where VR tech can go, because now all of a sudden we have a way to bring back the scalability question to the new approach to what we're doing with teams and companies, especially if we can find a way to create a virtual facilitator that's facilitating these virtual experiences that team members from all around the world, regardless of remote or non-remote, can join at the same time to have a kind of a hologram facilitator leading you through that debrief after you do the experience. That's something that is definitely more exponential than what we're doing right now.
For sure.
In a way that starts the conversation, helps people take that first step without without every 1 hour of our time leading to 1 hour of experience served. It's a way to scale that effect, which we're pretty excited about.
Yeah, right. And that's what you're always looking for, is some sort of non-linear relationship between your inputs and your outputs, which is
exactly.
Like, I mean, that's gorgeous when you can get there. So I want to go ahead and just sort of wrap up here with a couple of rapid fire questions. They're short questions. Your answers don't have to be short. But just sort of a bit all over the place. So one, I just wanted to follow up on something you mentioned before we started recording, but it sounded like a good story. Could you tell me a little bit about Vestigo's Obama O's moment and what that whole thing was?
Yeah, for sure. So we were very inspired by the starting story of Airbnb and how they bootstrapped enough money to get started when all the investors said, no, your idea is ridiculous, and no, why would anyone stay at some random person's house, which is just hilarious thinking back on that. So what they did to raise money for the early days to keep the lights on was they created this Captain Crunch style cereal called Obama O's during the initial election with Obama, where you have like a cartoon version of Obama on the front of the box, and sold this kind of election gimmick at the Democratic National Convention because they knew conventions better than anything else. They were in New York. Conventions were the times when the demand for Airbnb was the highest. And back then Airbnb was, two guys in an apartment. The reason why people used Airbnb is not because they were like, oh, that'd be cool to stay at some random person's house. It was just because there was a conference going on in a city like New York that literally booked out every single hotel room in the entire city. And the only alternative to not sleeping on the sidewalk, or staying at a friend's house, was Airbnb. So they knew conferences really, really well. And they used the Democratic National Convention to sell Obama O's and raise $20,000 from selling Cheerios as a way to keep the lights on. And we were like, we got to have our Obama O's moment. What can we sell that we know really well? And, personally, I just, like I said earlier, I love everything that combines adventure, entrepreneurship, and technology. And that was right around the time when these electric personal transportation devices were coming out. This is before Bird and Lyft and Lime and all the electric scooters blew up. This is when hoverboards just started appearing in videos on YouTube, but no one actually knew where you could buy one because you couldn't. They were just these things you saw online. You couldn't even order them online. So this was right after Singularity University, where we actually got a couple of hoverboards from a factory in China that some friend had a connection to. And some of these factories were just starting to make them because of the craze on YouTube. So we bought a shit ton of hoverboards. I think we put in an initial order for like 50 and sold them on Craigslist. And they, with no advertising at all, and we jacked up the price like 200, 300%, you're just sold out instantly. So we just started buying wholesale hoverboards from a factory in China, where we had to have my Chinese friend like translate for us and send a lot of the messages. And it was pretty sketchy, but we just got a bunch of these hoverboards from China and sold them as a way to promote adventure in your daily commute. So it's like relevant to the theme and the brand, a way to just make money, and raised enough from selling hoverboards to get our initial start. And that was actually where I personally fell in love with electric unicycles, which is now how I commute around pretty much everywhere. The factory that had the hoverboards in their catalog of random electric things that they made, they had this thing that I had never seen that I just thought was fascinating. So if you Google electric unicycle, it was a early version of that. I'd never seen a video of it. No one ever knew about them. And when we were putting in the order, I was just like, guys, can we add on this random thing that I've never seen before that I just really personally want? And they were like, will you pay for it? I was like, yeah. So we threw that in the order, and I got it. And it's this thing, you're just going to have to Google electric unicycle if you're listening to this. It's very hard to describe. But at first, I thought it was the stupidest. I was really mad I got it because I was like, this is impossible. You can't ride this. Like, what? How does this work? Because I just kept falling off and just thought it was impossible. And eventually got the hang of it and then was obsessed. I mean, it is, take this from someone who's flown jetpacks. It is the best electric technological form of personal transportation.
That is some high praise, my friend.
Oh, I know. I mean, you're not going to fly a jetpack to the grocery store, but I ride my electric unicycle to the grocery store every single day. I actually commute on them now because they have really high powered ones. That my current one goes 40 miles an hour, 100 miles on a charge, and I can pick it up and carry it on a bus with me or take it on a plane with me. I'm not supposed to take it on planes, but I do anyways.
Wow.
Or ride on the sidewalk when traffic's bad, or on the road when traffic's good. And now I'm obsessed with electric unicycles. It's almost like just the new form of human evolution of mobility.
This is like what the Segway hoped to be.
Oh yeah, it works the same as the Segway, except it's not massive and ridiculous looking, and you can actually pick it up, and it's cool.
Actually, it's funny. I Googled it as you were talking about it, and I saw a bunch of people bringing these to Burning Man this year, which I don't think they were supposed to, but I saw it. And I remember being out there on the plane being like, what is that? And now I know.
Yeah. I brought one 2-3 years ago when I first went, and I was one of like the only people that was there with them. And I saw a bunch of people that were just, and now I guess everyone's got electric unicycles. But
Marshall Mosher, Iron Man, and Trend Starter.
right,
Oh,
exactly.
it's amazing.
But yeah, it's actually it's a great way to travel with your girlfriend as well. Actually, carry Lindsay on my back, and we can just ride around on the unicycle. And
I love it.
It works easier. It's better than you'd think.
Okay, so electric things I need to buy now: electric unicycle and Oculus Quest. That's my lessons for today. I love it.
I actually have a video where I was just like, I just want to mess with people and see what people would do. I was unicycling with the Quest on, acting like I was fighting aliens or something down this really popular walkway called the Beltline in Atlanta, and had a friend that was like hiding in the woods filming people, and it was hilarious.
Oh God, please send me that video, and please let me put it in the show notes.
I definitely will.
Awesome.
For sure.
Yes. This makes me very happy. Okay. So another question. So I think we mentioned it throughout, once or twice throughout this conversation, but, over the last couple of years, you guys have actually developed an amazing podcast as well called Inside the Adventure. So everyone who's listening to this, if you've enjoyed this conversation, absolutely go over and listen to Inside the Adventure, and we'll link to that. But you've had some incredible guests you've had some totally mind-blowing people on your show. And I'm curious, when you look back over those, obviously there's a lot of amazing episodes, a lot of amazing conversations, but just off the cuff, is there any like particular conversations that stood out to you for whatever set of reasons, but maybe it really impacted how you saw something, or something you learned in that conversation just changed how you approach things?
For sure. Yeah. One of the reasons why I started that actually is because I was really inspired by the How I Built This podcast with Guy Raz. When I was first getting started in the entrepreneurship space, that was sort of what gave me the inspiration to say, you know what, I'm just going to give this a shot and go for it. So the theme behind Inside the Adventure is very similar to How I Built This, where we're interviewing people to hear really their whole life story of, what made them the way they are, and not just what made them famous. And instead of for entrepreneurship, it's for outdoor adventure and travel, lifestyle, or athletes, whether it's, a gold medal, kayaker, to a person who just never really traveled much, but wanted to do something crazy. So bought a bike and rode to South America and back, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And just hearing the stories of really how they took that first step, to kind of go back to that first step theme that's been kind of central to what we've done at Vestigo. And all these stories are just incredibly impactful. And it's hard to pick a favorite. I tend to sort of resonate with whatever one I just interviewed with recently, because they're all amazing. But one of the last ones that we interviewed that's not even live yet, has been kind of one of my inspirations in the paragliding world, which has been the most recent of adventure sports that I've gotten into and been obsessed with, which is what happens whenever I get into a new sport. And he's got a fascinating story. A guy named Gavin McClurg, who is one of the best paragliders in the United States, which is a country not known for its paragliding. Most of the paragliding community and most of the amazing athletes are from Europe. So there's this one race called the Red Bull X Alps, which is really the most intense adventure race that exists in the world. The most intense, not very well known race, for sure. In Europe, it's very well known, but because paragliding is not big in the US, most people don't know about it. But it's a race across the entire Alps in Europe, where you're flying and trail running, and the first person to Monaco wins. So it's you can fly, or you can run or walk, but you can't take a car or any other form of transportation. So it's a combination of people who are very good runners, but also people who are very good flyers. Obviously, the more time the more time you have in the air, the more likely you are.
Way more efficient.
Right. The more efficient you are. But it's constantly navigating all these other factors like weather conditions, which route is the best way to go based on those weather conditions and wind conditions, not just what route's the most direct way there. When to run instead of when to try to fly and just sit on the top of the mountain forever because the conditions aren't good. And it's just fascinating. And he's the only person from the US to ever even place in that race. So it kind of shows you how outpaced the rest of the world is in paragliding than the US. But had him on the show recently, and as someone who's this incredible world athlete in paragliding, he didn't get into paragliding, all that long ago. It was pretty recent, actually. And he actually started as in high school. He was a professional skier, wanted to go into the Olympics, blew out his knee, realized he can't really be an Olympic skier with a bad knee. So went to college, really just because his parents wanted him to, and realized that he just really is not meant for a desk job. He's like, I hated tying a tie and had an office in a building with no windows, and that just wasn't for me. So left and went to start whitewater kayaking and became a professional whitewater kayaking athlete. Had an incident in Mexico where he almost drowned and said, maybe I should pause press the pause button on whitewater kayaking. So he started a sailing company with really not that much sailing experience, where he took people on these kind of chartered sailing trips around the world. And through that, he did that for like 10 years, where he was saying in the early days, he didn't know anything about sailing. So there would be a lot of days when he would have clients coming and he would be reading about the lesson he was about to teach the clients, like in his cabin in the bottom of the boat, literally right before the clients actually got there. But made the sailing business where he just took people sailing around the world and circumnavigated the world, twice, and had a girlfriend that introduced him to paragliding, which she said was funny because the paraglider became his one true love and ended up breaking up with the girl, unfortunately for her. But you got into paragliding, and he's just had all these crazy careers in all these different adventure sports, which I really resonate with, because it's rare to find people that do a bunch of different things. Usually people stick to that one thing and that kind of becomes their identity. But the thing that I found the most fascinating thing about this guy's story is that he didn't let anyone else's expectations or fear of failure stop him from pursuing the things that he loved, even when he had no experience in those things. And just built this incredible story in life around just the pure outcome of following your passions. And since then, he's been named as one of the National Geographic's Adventurers of the Year, set multiple world records, and lived this really incredible life with some amazing stories that a lot of which have just come out from that passion for following your dreams, regardless of the probability of failure that might happen in any given scenario when you do that.
I love it. I cannot wait to listen to this episode. This sounds like a fantastic conversation. So I definitely will be listening to that one for sure. So my last question, I'm going to tell you the question, give you a second to think about it, because I'm going to answer it for you, or sorry, not for you, but
makes it easy for me.
I'm going to cut all this out. But anyways, my last question I was going to ask you is there any particular book or few books that have really shaped how you view things, or that you're finding to be very impactful on your journey with Vestigo? So I'm going to give you a second to think about that, because I also actually have, as it just sort of hit me, I was thinking back over the conversation we've just been having, and there's two books that really stand out to me that I've read and loved in the last year that I feel like if you haven't read, you would really enjoy. And I think people who have enjoyed this conversation would also enjoy. Actually, three come to mind. The first two are specifically about you. The third one is more about like kind of company culture and all that. So the company culture one, I'll start there, is a book I actually just discovered and read recently, called Primed to Perform. Are you familiar with that book?
No, I'll have to check it out.
So I just came across this, read it, loved it. And it was fascinating because what they did was they basically aggregated a lot of research. It was this duo out of Harvard, came out a couple years ago. I'm not sure exactly when, but they aggregated a ton of the research around like motivation and psychology and kind of everything from like self-determination theory to kind of flow and all those sorts of things. And they put it into a very simple, but I find to be useful model that has really, I read it and I was like, oh, wow, I feel like these people actually came up with a workable, useful model that helps me understand what really drives and also detracts from that sort of inner motivation and drive that people have. And I, as someone who thinks a lot about creating environments for people to thrive, that seemed pretty relevant to me. So I wanted to just recommend that. I think you would both enjoy it and also find it useful for the work you do.
Awesome. Thank you.
So that's book rec one. You're welcome. Number two, and this is more specific to what you were saying just now about like how, you love, it's so obvious, like how much you love the rush of taking on a new thing, of pushing your limits in a new space, right? You talked about like, you'll become a level 4, a class 4, like whitewater rafter, but not really interested in the 5 because you don't want to die, and you'll go do something else, which, by the way, good call, I think. But really talking about being like, one of the things I find fascinating is I guess it's called meta learning, right? Like the art of learning, being like learning how to learn better. And there's a lot of great material out there about that. But one book in particular that came out recently is called Ultra Learning by a guy named Scott Young that I found to be really, really good. And that's a topic I also deeply nerd out on. So that's another one to check out that I think you might like. And the third one, and I don't this is recency bias coming into play because I'm rereading this book right now, but it's a book called Mastery by a guy named George Leonard. And he talks at great length about what does it mean to truly master something, and what does the journey and the path of mastery really look like? Whether that something is programming or whitewater rafting or dance or painting or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, but it's like, what does the path of mastery, regardless of the domain, look like? And what are the pitfalls and the lessons that we can all take advantage of there? And as someone who's obsessed with learning and loves all the things we're talking about here, I thought it would be something you also found useful and enjoyable. So check that out.
Awesome. Yeah, I've actually got all three of those added to my list now. Can't wait.
Boom. Done. All right. So now your turn. So is there a book or a few books that have really impacted you? You found them incredibly useful, or you just enjoyed the hell out of?
Yeah, we actually, I think this is the sign of a really good podcast host when you get the guest to talk about those books and other questions. I think we already talked about a lot of them, actually. So The Rise of Superman and a lot of Stephen Kotler's work for sure. Ready Player One, what we mentioned with the virtual reality. That's probably one of my favorite fiction books. Start With Why, one of Simon Sinek's earlier books. A lot of Brene Brown's work. So yeah, a lot of those have been really foundational to kind of what we've developed at Vestigo, and have really kind of put some of the kind of framework in place for us. Lately, I've been listening to a bunch of kind of podcasts and this app called Blinkist as well, which, have you ever heard of that? It's sort of the Spark Notes for books. So it has a really great recommendation engine for saying, if you liked X book or some other book, you'll probably like this one. And it's not really reading a book, but it's sort of the 30-minute summary of the message of that book. And that's been an awesome app for books for anyone out there who's just looking for better ways to find books. It's been really great. But yeah, so those ones I mentioned are really probably the most foundational ones for me. And I'm excited to read those ones that they suggested. Thanks for that.
Awesome. Yeah. You're welcome. I always love talking about ideas and books and stuff. So let me know how you like them. And yeah, one way I've seen people use Blinkist sort of very intentionally is not just the discovery thing, which I actually didn't know about. So thanks for sharing, for explaining that. But the other way I've seen it used that I thought was oh wow, that's a really good idea, is to actually test or quickly test, like, is this book worth going deep on?
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, you can read, listen to this, like whatever, 20-minute sort of snippet and little Spark Notes thing. And it's like, okay, like sometimes that's sufficient. And you're like, nope, cool, I'm good. And then other times you're like, okay, yep, I definitely want to go deep on this thing. I'm going to go actually read the whole thing.
For sure. Because I mean, how many book recommendations for everyone out there listening do you get, and you read the first quarter of the book and then you never finish it? It really helps you avoid that of kind of like getting into a book and being like, I'm not really engaged in this anymore, because you can get the theme of what the book's like and then say, oh, well, that was okay, or give me more of this, I need it right now. So yeah, it helps
especially true, unfortunately, for business books, where far too common any sort of business or leadership book would have been better as like a long article than a 160-page book or whatever, right? Like, unfortunately, that is really, really common.
For sure. Well, it's a lot of speakers have to have a book these days, so it's disincentive. I get it. But, just saying, as an obsessive reader, a lot of them don't need to be books. Yeah,
but, and then related to that, actually, there's a practice that a guy I work with recommended to me that I've been trying on, which as an obsessive reader has been confronting, but I'm finding it to actually be very, very helpful. And he said one of the most powerful practices or like just habits he took on was he stopped. He started putting down books if he didn't want to read the book anymore. Like if he got bored and he was, halfway through or whatever, he would just put it down. And he's like, no other practice he could think of in the last 6 months has made a bigger impact on his life. And I was like, oh, wow. So I've been trying that. And despite my sense of compulsion that I must finish the book, I have to agree, it has actually been a really, really good practice. And so kind of my one question I wanted to wrap up here with on the rapid fire ones is there any practices like that for you that doesn't have to be about books and reading, but are there any personal practices that have come into your life somehow in the last year, 2 years, whatever, that have really made a difference for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would love to ask you the same after this as well, because as much of an avid reader as you are, I'm sure you've got some really good ones that are probably a lot better than mine. But the big thing for me is that I'm just a very slow text processor. So I actually had extended time in college for tests that had something to do with just reading a bunch and processing. So even stuff like the SAT and things like that. So it takes me forever to actually read a book, which is why I can't tell you the last time that I physically read an actual book. So what I do is I listen to audiobooks. I really like podcasts. Any kind of audio content, I absorb a lot faster. And, not everyone's like that. A bunch of people are like, I have to have my physical book. I like turning the page. That's great for those people. I am not one of those people. But I also just love having, a million books in my pocket on my phone. And even the text version of the books, a lot of people say, oh, well, I like highlighting stuff. You can have Siri read the text version of a book that's on your phone without actually buying an audiobook. And a lot of times those, it's called the EPUB format of a book. It sort of just looks like a PDF that you can interact with. Those are oftentimes much cheaper than audiobooks. So if you don't mind a semi-robotic sounding voice, which Siri gets better every year, but if you don't mind Siri reading you books, you can do this thing. You have to enable this in settings, but it's a 2-finger swipe down from the top, and Siri will read you the contents on any page. So even with articles as well, I'll use this app called Pocket to save an article to the app. And what Pocket does is it gets rid of all of the ads, all of the unnecessary text other than the article. And then I have Siri, I do the 2-finger swipe down. Siri starts reading all the text on the page. If you don't use Pocket to do that, it'll literally read you out like www. blah, 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 like today's date, all the stuff you don't want Siri to read you. Pocket eliminates that, and then it just turns any article into an audiobook that you can listen to on 1 time speed, on 10 times speed. I usually do like 1.75 or 2, and pretty much allows me to turn any written content on my phone into audio, even email. If I get a long email from someone, I'll have Siri read it to me instead of just sitting there reading.
What a cool idea. What a cool way to like adapt the tools to yourself, right? To like what works best for you. I love that.
Yeah, thanks. It's technically like an accessibility setting. It's literally in the accessibility settings on the iPhone. So it's for people who can't see the screen well, or if you're blind and you can't see it at all, to be able to read the contents on your phone. So there's some amazing accessibility updates in iOS 13 that would blow people's mind, that are technically meant for someone with some type of physical disability, but from a productivity standpoint, it can really be a game changer. So you can talk to your computer and do anything on your computer just by talking to it now. Same with your phone. Not just dictating text. You could open apps, move your mouse around, purely from voice interaction with your computer and your phone. So I dictate almost everything. I dictate my emails now because I'm faster at talking than just writing. And it takes some practice, but there's some amazing productivity hacks built into the accessibility settings that Mac users should definitely check out.
I love that. What a cool, seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity from a marketing angle. So all the, product people take note. Sometimes your accessibility stuff has completely different utility to a different group of people.
Exactly. That's very true.
I love that. Well, very cool. So just kind of in closing, I wanted to ask, first of all, where can people connect with you online? And also, is there anything you want to leave the audience with, or any requests you have for someone listening to this? Yeah,
well, definitely connect with me if there's anything I can do to help, even if it's just through advice. There have been a lot of people in my life that have gone way out of their way to give me advice that really changed the trajectory of what we ended up doing and the things that I'm passionate about. So I'm definitely very bought into the kind of the pay it forward mindset, and would love to help however I can with anyone listening. Connecting is usually best via LinkedIn or Instagram. LinkedIn for the boring stuff, Instagram for the fun stuff. So if you want to watch all those fun adventure stuff, you can follow me on @MarshallMosher. If you type in Marshall and then just M, it should come up. I'm actually right above Eminem, which that was like one of my, like, wow, I can't believe that. I was pretty honored.
Like, look,
it's like, wow,
I made it. I made it.
I made it in life.
Yes.
And then LinkedIn, you just search Marshall Mosher, and hopefully it'll pop up somewhere up in the top several. But shoot me a message on either one of those. Happy to help however I can. And if there's one takeaway I could say from sort of the message today, the theme is, don't be afraid to get outside your comfort zone. Use that in a vulnerable way to encourage and engage your team to push past their own perceived limits in a way that can connect you and the rest of your team on a deeper and more meaningful level.
I love it. Well, with that, thank you so much, brother. It's been a really fun conversation, and I can't wait for people to get a chance to tap into the wisdom you just dropped all over us.
Same. We'll have to have round 2 for the next podcast at Burning Man next year.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on iTunes. That helps us reach way more people and build this community up. For show notes, links to the resources, and everything else we discussed, please go to enliven.fm. Feel free to reach out with questions, feedback, or just to say hello by emailing connect@enliven.fm. Be sure to subscribe, and until next time, my friends, leave them better than you found them. We'll see you soon.